Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Mark Ostrander is on the train today, so GT and I will try to muddle through this without him. Grant, good to see you, brother.
Hey, good to be a part of the pod today.
So I'm in Watertown, Massachusetts. I will shortly be leaving for the Beat the Streets duels. The results and everything will happen before this posts. But Grant, my hotel is a block and a half from the Nike outlet store.
Ooh, there we go. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. So I may have gotten myself a little travel cooler. Might have gotten myself a pair of J's. We're working over here. We're trying to make it happen. For sure. So let's talk about Beat the Streets New England first. This is the national duels. Last year was in Chicago. I think they had a tough night last night. They were supposed to go to the Red Sox game, and the thunderstorms here were so bad, the power actually went out in the hotel for 30 seconds. So I don't know what plan B was, but it wasn't anything outside. Today are the duels between like the 12 to 14 organizations. And then tomorrow is the elite event at Big Night Live. I'm doing the play-by-play there with Patrick Martinez, who's part of Beat the Street Chicago, former Greco guy, former University of Wyoming guy. And the two main event matches that I was a part of matchmaking is Daniel Cepeda, Alex Braun, and in Greco, Spencer Woods, Benji Peak at a catchweight. So hopefully we'll see some good wrestling today and tomorrow, right, Grant?
I think that's some big names. I think you're going to have a really good showing with that group.
Yeah, I want to thank Cam Sikora, Jason Leonard, Alex Braun, and his mom on that side of it, and then Cepeda and DC Cormier on their side on being pretty easy to work with. Well, we're just easy to work with and just corresponding everything. So it's a pain to matchmake things. I talked to Sikora about it at Junior Duels, but it's cool when it comes together, and it's one of the ways I try to give back to Beat the Street. So hopefully people will watch that tomorrow and today. Your boy will be on the mic this afternoon for the finals. And then tonight I get to meet in person Mike Joyce, the head coach of Ponagansett, who is one of the teams coming to Hall of Fame duels this year. So it's all very full circle Lacuna Matata things going on up here.
Yeah, circle of life. Absolutely.
Circle of life, bro. So, hey, you do these things, the fun facts, like your traveling foods of the world. I think like maybe you and I should start doing hotel reviews. I realize like probably every weekend of the year, one of us has been in a hotel, and like maybe we could get Marriott or Hilton to be a sponsor. That would be, or Hyatt. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, that would be something.
I actually might reach out because I think we could do it for points. If USA Wrestling allowed it, like I don't think we need a lot of money, just some points so we could travel would be great. So way to work. There's probably a deal to be made there, right?
I think so. I think we can make something happen.
And speaking of where I could use hotel points, last weekend I was in Tulsa for Junior Duels, and you and I have been there. The photos popped in my memories of you and I at the Mayo Rooftop Bar, you at the piano, entertaining the crowd with your skills on the ivories. But some great wrestling there, well over 100 wrestlers ranked on the boys' side. And Gary Abbott was kind enough to send me an email of every girl ranked and whether they were up or down in a weight, which really helped on the play-by-play. Super helpful. Also super interesting to see where the coach has kind of jostled things around. Like you're ranked second at 138 and I'm ranked 10th at 144, but they think you can beat me. So they move you up and you beat me. And, and duels are, Grandview's been unbelievable the last 10 years in duels, like a gazillion and one against non-D1 opponents. And as much as you guys are good, sometimes you don't play the game head up. Sometimes it makes sense to shuffle the deck a little bit. But the finals came down. So there's 2 matches left, and Ohio is winning by 1 point. but they are losing in matches 7-6. And the second part is relative because what's great about junior duels tiebreakers is the only one tiebreaker who won 8 matches or who won more matches, which is 8 out of 15. So no national duels, semifinals, nightmare criteria rulebook readings. So if Blaze had gotten a pin, Ohio wins. If Blaze gets a shutout Tech, then Wisconsin has to pin to win. But Blaze actually lost a takedown, got a Tech, but the team score was 4-1. So that put them up 4. And then Kellen Wolbert gets the pin to win it. I think it was 33-32 or 32-31 in favor of Wisconsin. And Ohio threw a brick. And I wanted to talk to you about this because I don't know if you saw this, but you're still coaching actively. And I'll probably ask Mark about this next week. Ohio throws a brick, and their argument is as soon as Wolbert got the fall, Ben runs out on the mat, Askren, they hug. It's a moment of genuine celebration. I think you and I can agree that Askren and Askren Wrestling Academy have been absolutely instrumental in catapulting Wisconsin into the upper tier of wrestling states in America in the high school level for sure. And they throw the brick because they're saying it should be a team point. So first of all, those guys should know the rules, and they should know even if they win the challenge, they still lose the duel 8-7. But second of all, it took away from the moment. And third of all, Askren went on his mindset stuff and was talking about the integrity of doing that, which I have multiple opinions on. But I'm curious what you think about that situation.
Well, I think we alluded to this I think last week is that not very often do you know the whatever freestyle duel rules or freestyle duel scoring, because it's only 4 junior duels, cadet duels, schoolboy duels, and the World Cup on the senior level. So you're not really getting a ton of exposure to getting a Tech and they didn't score, so they didn't get any points, or go out there and just get one, get a push out so that we can get a point for the duel team. So, that type of stuff is I think that alludes to the conversation of brick challenges. And then how does the coaching staff basically determine what you can do for dual scoring there at the end. But I think knowing the rules is it's such an important part of
Yep.
match and dual strategy.
Yes.
Well, hey, I got a kid that can go out there and leg lace somebody, but he's just got to go get the first takedown. All of a sudden he could get a Tech. And it's well, if we need to shut them out, points or whatever, I'll risk that conversation versus a guy that maybe just he'll win, but it'll be a hard fought 17-15 match, right?
Yes.
So I think to not necessarily go into the specifics of why whatever the coach's challenge or whatever, but I think that it's monumental or paramount that you just know what you're actually going to challenge and what are you going to try to do to get a deduction of a team point.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned knowing the rules, and it sounds like such a simple statement, but okay, I think most of us that like wrestling like football, and the NFL, when there was overtime rules, there were teams that didn't, the guys playing in the Super Bowl didn't know the overtime rules. These are the top of the top. These are the 1% does them an injustice. All the people that played a down of organized football in their life versus playing in the NFL versus playing in the Super Bowl versus being on the field. And they don't know the rules. And the coaches, I don't even know if they all knew the rules. I don't want to insult anybody, in the NFL. But I feel we started doing this with our announcers at Hall of Fame duels, and we did it this year. You got to keep a pen and paper, and you need to keep track. What happened before the girls' duel finals was track wrestling crashed. It crashed everywhere. Flow Sports crashed. And they didn't want to delay it any further. So we were going to literally just keep team score on paper. And we made an agreement with the Pennsylvania, Missouri coaches that every 2 matches, we were going to check in with them and make sure that the team score was correct, because you couldn't put it on the board. The board was one of those bricks or cubes, and you can only put the match score on there. And everybody was cool with it. And then right before we were ready to start, track popped back up, which was obviously ideal. But you would think somebody over there, I mean, they got 9 coaches in the corner, literally 4 coaches in the corner and 20 other people standing on the side of the stage. Like, should be one person either keeping track of it on their phone or laptop or a piece of paper. That's like, hey, we only won 7 matches, so we got to win outright. So this challenge is unnecessary. So it was interesting. I think the other thing that's cool about junior duels is the team aspect. Like, this is the first time Wisconsin won a team title. It's a different scoring system, obviously, than Fargo. It's very much like if there was a national duels versus the NCAAs or non-Division I duels. Obviously Grandview participates in those and for the most part has won both of those tournaments for years. But you generally have a closer duels result, you guys do, versus the tournament. And yours is interesting because the tournament's 12 guys. The duel's only 10. And if your 11th and 12th guys are better than my 11th and 12th guys, the gap widens. So, but the other thing, and you and I both said this on the air, like in duels, your worst guys decide who wins. And in tournaments, your best guys decide who wins. Like if you're a stud, you go run through the tournament, score 25, 30 points at D1s, you're a top 25 team by yourself. In a duel, you can score 6 points. And I might suck, but I might pin another guy, luckily, and I scored 6 points. And theoretically, I neutralized you. Where there's no way at the national tournament I'm going to go score 26 points. So it leads itself to a lot more closer results. I went back and looked at it. 11 of the 15 matches were early terminations. By that, I mean pins or techs. But they were so evenly divided, and then like you mentioned, hey, you teched me, but I got to step out against you, or I don't know, like, crotch through, double leg, crotch through, roll through, 4-2, but I still got my 2 kind of thing, so I was thinking about this. I try to think at least a little bit ahead of time what we're going to talk about. I would tell you this, and you've been to both of these, so I'm interested if you agree, and these are USA Wrestling events. The 2 events that I think more people should go to, and what I mean by that is they're underattended for how entertaining they are, is the US Open and junior duels. I mean, I think there's so much good wrestling. You're right next to the mats if you want to be. The format's fairly easy to follow in both of them. And the tickets aren't super expensive. The hotels aren't super expensive. I don't want to see how much flights are because Tulsa and Las Vegas may cost people a different amount of money, but they're generally always held the same time of the year, so you can book it ahead of time. And if you're a wrestling nerd, there's just so much wrestling to see during those. I think both those tournaments are generally 4 to 6 days.
Yeah, I mean, I think as wrestling people, I think once again, I think a lot of stuff is regional, right? So if you're able to go to the U.S. Open because you're on the West Coast and you can go to Vegas and it's a lot cheaper for you to attend. I know that like I hear you on both of those events from the standpoint of like proximity. Like you're walking next to, the Coleman Scotts of the world. You're walking next to Jake Varner. You're walking like you're in that same tight knit, like where you're not like elevated like at NCAAs, where you can't go and like you're basically like having to run down to the wall and trying to get their attention or whatever. Like those guys are going to walk by you as they go back to their hotel room or to grab like a water or something. So I think probably to add to that, I would say I always feel like Final X is one of those type of events that it's like showcase.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's something that once again, I think it's extremely well attended, but I think it's also based off of regions, right? So like when we were in Newark, it was a humongous venue, amazing event, basically selection for the world team. Really, really cool. I remember that like multiple times, like, wow, like we're filling up or like we have this amazing arena to try to be able to do this. And I think it just lends itself to, once again, no disrespect to the South Point Hotel and Casino. difference in feel comparative to like an NHL caliber, presentation.
Yeah.
So I still think for what that it is, junior duels and the US Open are two of like the really, really big heavy hitters to be able to go and showcase and go and see really great stuff. I'd say, it's out of all of the properties that USA Wrestling has, I think that those would be the three: the Final X, US Open, and junior duels. I think where it gets crazier is like cadets and schoolboy duels. Because then all of a sudden it's like these little men and women are like, that's where you're getting the 32 to 28 matches, right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I'm invested into, I don't know, Indiana versus Louisiana. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, huge fan of that kid. Came all the way back.
Yeah. Where they pop up a lot of times. Like the Willie Sailors of the world, and I've become much better friends with Willie working through Hall of Fame duels. Like, people like ask me like, what's it like working with him? I'm like, I have no desire to know who the number 28 guy in America is at 113 pounds. Willie not only wants to know it, does know it, and can tell you why. But I do need to know it in the sense of putting together the best teams for the Hall of Fame duels. Just like, oh, Grant Turner High School has this guy on their team, they're worth considering, kind of thing. But I think what's interesting about junior duels is like if Mark was on the show, Mark's primarily a college guy, right? Like he's not an international guy, he's not really a high school guy, he's a college guy. And I say that respectfully. It's one of the reasons we brought you on the pod is because you're an international guy and a USA Wrestling person. So Mark's not going to really start paying attention to a lot of these kids, a guy like Mark, and there's a whole genre of those guys.
For sure.
Until they know they're committed, right? So like, when Ryder Block says, I'm going to go to Iowa, they start watching Ryder Block at junior duels in Fargo. Well, by the time these guys verbal, they're usually already at the junior level. They're past the cadet level. And so that's the other thing is like, you can see these guys. So like I got to call the semis and finals of the boys and girls freestyle. I didn't get to do the boys Greco because the same time as the girls finals. But I got to call the Mirasola Drayshawn Ross match. And those guys are going to score a truckload of points in college, at the NCAAs. But the only way they won is if Drayshawn Ross doesn't wrestle. I mean, and then they'll score half the points because Mirasola is going to be a superstar. He already is a superstar. But to watch those guys now, Mirasola won. It was a really close match. Mirasola was never behind. I think the final was 6-4. There are so many takeaways from that. Like, hey, Mirasola was never in the lead or never behind, excuse me. Drayshawn did his best to run him down. Drayshawn's bigger, so like Drayshawn's done making weight, I think. Like, he's going to be either like a 110 kilo guy or a heavyweight in college. I mean, he'll be a heavyweight in high school for sure. He'll kill everyone in the state of Iowa in high school wrestling. Like, he's the next Keeter. But to see those guys like Jax Forrest Larkin, right? Like the match we had, like to see those guys in high school and then they wrestle a couple of years later in college. You're like, I saw this match. It's interesting to see how they develop. And if you're just a college person, there's nothing wrong with that. We only have so many hours in the day to pay attention to things, but you kind of miss the prologue, like, hey, like you kind of missed the preamble to things like, hey, this is what led up to this. And the more you get the data on the front end, the more the back end makes sense. So highly encourage people, if they can't go to these tournaments, to watch them because they're so good. Selfish shout out to Missouri on the girls' side. They double finaled. They lost to Pennsylvania in the finals on the girls. Congratulations to PA. They lost to California girls in Greco. Shout out to Robbie Smith. Those I think they won 11 out of the 15 matches in the final there. So they really put on a show. But congrats to Mon Prater, Bobby Herrick, and all the young ladies on that team that's a lot of matches, bro. Freestyle and Greco, that's somewhere between 12 and 16 matches. So a lot to that. One of the other things, and if people are watching this, last week I had my backdrop wrong. So the last week's pod didn't post. The timing is okay for this, but last week I interviewed, we pronounce it Sidakov is how the correct pronunciation of his name, Grant. And that was put together by Brian Medlin from the University of Illinois, RTC, director of ops there. Yesterday, I interviewed Medlin separately. They've both been sent to USA Wrestling. I don't know how they're going to piece them together. They may do them separate, or I don't know. That's kind of up to Gary and those guys. But I had texted Medlin about this because the big news is who's going to be in the Olympics, or more importantly, who's not going to be in the Olympics. And just to review and then kind of give you the floor, 16-person brackets in the Olympics, 5 from the Worlds instead of 6, 8 from the Continentals, 2 times 4, 3 from the Last Chance. So 5 plus 8 plus 3 equals 16. The Olympics were set. Like the tournament where Spencer and Zane qualified, because that's how Americans think of it, that was it. The field was set. Now people are going to be pulled out, and so other people are going to be plugged in. There's talks of Kamal Bey. We have nothing official. So, but he was the guy that took 4th at the Last Chance, so seemingly he might be in line. Again, not saying he is or isn't. But the thing about some of these Russians, Belarusians not being able to wrestle, there's a couple things I want to point out. Number one is that it has nothing to do with doping at all. These people all passed their drug tests. Okay, and I think some people are kind of confusing this, like they watched Icarus years ago and now they're thinking this is part of it. So that has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the war in Ukraine and other political things. And Medlin's point was that these guys don't support any war, that the government gives them money. They don't have a lot of choice on whether they accept it or not. You know, it's not a democracy over there. And if they don't accept it, there's ramifications. And if they do accept it, there's ramifications. I can tell you this, the Zoom we did with Sidakov, I hope we're able to put it out. They don't have Google Meet, so that's one thing. But like I wasn't on camera, which wasn't important. I couldn't get my camera to work, but he could not have been a nicer human being. Like Medlin called him 24 hours later, we're doing it. I don't even know if it was 24 hours, to be honest. Okay. We didn't pay him. Okay. I don't think he knew what we were going to ask in advance. I mean, Medlin told me what we couldn't ask, but you know, our pod does fine, but we're not Joe Rogan. Okay. So, I mean, could not have been nicer, more gracious, funny, the whole thing. You live in this world where you know a lot more of these guys' credentials and the women's credentials, the names, the history of these people. I'll just say this and I'll get out of the way. It seems a shame to me that, you know, politics get involved in this. It happened at 80 and 84. It seems like every year or every quad, something happens. Usually it's not with America. But I just got a whole different viewpoint on the humanity of Sidakov and some of these other people by extension than I had before. And I know you work with these countries, so, you know, kind of want to get your high level opinion on this.
Well, I think first and foremost, when it comes to let's even call it the Russian system of athletics, and I'll specifically, because I don't know enough about the Belarus or Belarusian athletic departments or whatever, is like, you know, there's a minister of sport, you know, there's, you know, like an actual government entity that like oversees all that kind of stuff. So like, and also there is a part of, I would call it like the WCAP program, but for Russia. So it's not like the world-class athlete program, but like some of these guys also work for either military arms or political organizations or something along those lines, where it's like, it is part of it. And I think the other thing that we tend to forget sometimes is that, like, I think Russia is very proud of Russia. Like, and like the citizens are, you know, like, you know, you basically just like, we're very proud to be this. It's like Minnesota, like Minnesotan people, like they love that they're from Minnesota.
So that's we've seen a lot of that with Oklahoma, with the Oklahoma State hire, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, once again, if you're proud of your state, and like, I mean, Iowans are very proud of Iowans. Like,
yes,
you know, like,
they are like fight me proud of Iowa.
Right. So I think once again, I think that like there is some of this, political and propaganda type stuff that happens, but I think it's a shame that like somebody that is basically pushed into the limelight because they're really good at wrestling or boxing or fencing or weightlifting or whatever it may be, and like you become almost like a sign of your state, and you have to basically toe the party line of what your state is saying. So I think also just from the international to international relationships when it comes to wrestling, I think that wrestling is a perfect bridge to a lot of the countries that politically maybe don't play together very well. Like I know that, Iran wrestlers are gracious and amazing to work with and talk to, and very much like love the sport of wrestling. The Russians have a lot of respect for American style of wrestling, and I think there was I don't know where he was, maybe he was on the UWW platform where he was talking about wrestling Dake and Burroughs and some of the other guys and things of that nature, where it was like a lot of respect to how the differences in style and training. I think that all stays within the sport column. Like, hey, I have a lot of respect for my opponents in like what they do and all these other things. So it's very much like an individualistic look of things, but it's also system to system. So I think there's a aspect of, unfortunately, country to country, when it's like, hey, that's also what the Olympics are. Like, I'm not wrestling whoever it is. I'm not wrestling Sadakov. I'm not wrestling Hassan Yazani. Like, yeah. I'm wrestling Iran. I'm wrestling Russia. Like, of course, like all the USA people, like, hey, we want to win. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. Like, that's the quarterfinal match. But it's
right.
It's those things that I think fall victim to it. And I think, once again, it's not the first time that I think the politics of like the federations like stepping away. But I think this is different from the standpoint that the IOC is not allowing specific athletes or even countries to participate due to whatever reasons that the IOC is then placed upon them.
Yeah. And I say this statement and people get mad at me. I talk about people rooting for the laundry and, like, hey, like Kyle Parko's at Iowa now, and Iowa rooted against Kyle Parko for 3 years, and this year they're going to root for him. And that's just a micro example. Everybody's, like at Missouri. Ben Askren was not from Missouri. He came to Missouri, did his thing, went back to Wisconsin. He is still beloved in Columbia, Missouri, as he should be. So the one year I did the World Championships on the play-by-play, you're always supposed to be neutral, right? On the play-by-play, like, I don't have to give you an example. Like, I didn't root for Connor Marisola or Drayshawn Ross, okay? Like, but the one exception is when USA is wrestling in the World Championships, like you're allowed to favor the American. Like I was told that the night before we did 9 days, like you're allowed to favor the American and you actually probably should. And right. So, and it's like, okay, like, Kyle Snyder went to Ohio State and he's at Penn State now, but everybody in America is going to root for Kyle Snyder, including the people from the other 70 colleges that he beat their brains out, for a bunch of years of college wrestling. Like there becomes a bigger picture, right? Like you've probably seen it live, but you hear these amazing stories about how all these coaches and athletes go to the Olympic Training Center and all the collegiate laundry gets thrown out. And now it's like, hey, Grant, can you help me with this? Like, hey, Grant, I've been watching you wrestle. I think this might be something that would work for you.
Yep.
And there's this whole spirit of cooperation and it's higher purpose. And we're trying to win for America. And, like there's that picture of Burroughs and the Iranian, I guess is how you're supposed to say it, with their arms around each other on the podium. I think it's from like back in 2012, and it's how countries can come together and things like that. And so I really hope these podcasts get put up. I can't thank Medellin enough, man. Like GT, there's things like you and me have been working on border brawl stuff. Border brawl is really important to me, and it is elevated because of the relationship with Nike and Athlete PS. And I think we all want the podcast to be as good as it could be, this one. And then I know you root for me on the other one to get the best guest, ask the best questions. and have helped me get guests before. Literally, like, hey, can you help me talk to so and so? And you're like, yeah, you want his number or her number, or you want me to call him for you, whatever. So to get to talk to Sadakov, especially at any time, would have been amazing. But during this particular time, big thanks to Medlin. It's worth listening to the Medlin podcast alone because he talks about the Russian system and he talks about the kid system, how different it is. And I will ruin part of the podcast with one funny story. So Wyatt Medlin, his son, is class of 26. He's consensus top 50 kid, pound for pound. He's in the Pan Ams right now. So U17. So good luck to Wyatt, Joe Jeter, and all those kids down there. But his first match, Grant, was at 12 years old in Russia. First match. And he didn't know he was going to wrestle. Like he said over there, they just wrestle matches all the time, but it's not like there's nothing like Tulsa Nationals. And he said that when they announced it, they like announced whatever the other Russian kid's name was. And they go, and American champion Wyatt Medlin. And then he was 0. I go, well, he was undefeated. And he just said that, Brian intentionally didn't coach him and that the kids he'd been training with coached him. And that like he hit a fireman at the very end and won the match. And it was very cool, like very father-son conversations there. I got a chance to talk about my pops on there. I know how close you are with your pops. So I'd encourage people when that comes out to listen to it, talking about the importance of perspective, of the relationship being more important than the results on the mat. And I think anytime, like if our podcast impacts one parent-child relationship in a positive way, because it can be male, female on either side of that, then that's a blessing. And it's a blessing to talk to these folks that are this smart in the sport. So, I hope people will check that out. We're kind of in a relative dead period right now, Grant. Like there's not a lot of, Pan Ams are going on, age group Pan Ams are going on. We just killed everybody at U23s, like pretty much 8 to 10 gold medals on every team. I talked to Cornell Robinson about that, who's coached those before. And it's like, you just don't want to be the one person that didn't take first. And it's a very real indicator that A, how hard it is to make our team. And B, if you extrapolate that up to the Olympic level, you got to qualify at the Worlds or Pan Ams. Like our region, we should never be than second worst at the senior level. And so like what Spencer did and what Zane did was way harder. And they also were not the folks that went to qualify the weights. That was done by two separate and two other individuals. So, kind of looking at that and understanding like, hey, we're dominant at these age group levels. There's no reason to think we're going to go from U23 to seniors and all of a sudden stink. Like if we don't get it done at the Worlds as a country, we got to get it done at that Pan Am level and save everybody a lot of stress. And then you can go score points and try to get a better seed at these tournaments instead of worrying about multiple peaking periods and things like that. So, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Otherwise, I may curveball you here because you and I had a conversation. We were talking about Iowa State, and it's June. We might as well talk about how the dual meet's going to go. Right?
Well, I think what was it last week? We were talking about some of the new additions to like whatever the transfers and like the addition of Christian Carroll to Iowa State and also the addition of Kyle Parko going to Iowa. I think the one thing that I think we also talked about, like I think there was a couple other people and things of that nature where it's like, of course, I think we're making fun of Mark too, where it was, of course, like on our radar, like Mark's like, oh yeah, we're talking about that already, right? But I think the one thing about maybe even the collegiate stuff that I think we alluded to, I think a couple of podcasts ago, is that all of the coaching changes that are still occurring.
Yes.
And like, I think since then, I think, Pritzloff took the Columbia job, I believe there was like a whole, like Matt Malcolm went up to be an assistant coach at NDSU. There's tons of guys that I think I'm sure that was like 2 or 3 podcasts ago.
Hadley to Stanford. Yeah.
But I think with that still kind of looming with this upcoming season is that like we are in an age of like there's still so many more jobs that are like opening up as the summer kind of rolls along. So to get to duels and all that kind of stuff is like it's crazy. It's like what are we doing? Like it's
fun to talk about. And
no, for sure. I mean, I think it's like, but I think it's like when we get everybody together and we talk about those duels and it's like, okay, well then we like get into the rumor mill and conjecture of like, well, like, okay, well, like Nelson wrestled at 86 kilos, like 100% he's going to go 184. Like what is, I think there's a part of those conversations I think that need to occur at like almost every state. Like what's going to happen with, these new recruits, like the new ones that are coming out. We talked about that. I think we talked about that on the phone. We're talking about like with David Taylor taking over at Oklahoma State, like the projection of like those sophomores that we talked about with Willie off his big board, whatever it is, the kids that are coming out, like the Bo Bassett's of the world in that kind of category, like that could change up the level of a program quickly if you get something like that in, which then changes your duels for the next 4 years. Like, okay, like you get.
Go ahead, yeah.
So to bring it all the way back to the Iowa State conversation is that Christian Carroll is now going to go wrestle 197 pounds for Iowa State next year because they bring back younger Bastida at heavyweight.
Right.
And he's got, was it 3 full years?
Carroll,
yeah.
Yeah.
He's got 3 full years for them. It's like, okay, well, that's going to be a guy that either could transition to heavyweight after 1 year at 197, or he could stay at 97. But you have him in your program potentially now for a long time.
Yes. So to go back to your first thing, like when Pritzloff leaves, now Rutgers is going to hire somebody good. They're probably hiring from somebody else. That the coaching carousel. I think this is an obvious sentence. There's still an RTC job available in Stillwater. May or may not get filled after the Olympics. Tons of rumors out there about that, but clearly a job is available there in terms of slots. I think there's a 0% chance that they don't fill that position. That is a tool that can help you with recruits, right? Like if Jake Varner is your Nittany Lion Wrestling Club coach and you're a big guy, really any size guy, but like especially, Varner won the Olympics, right? Like when a lot of these kids were growing up, like, man, I can go have that guy teach me. Like that's pretty freaking awesome. So, there's a ton of possibilities on all these things, and it just never really stops. I remember when we first started doing this podcast, GT, there were some weeks I go to Mark, I'm like, I don't know what we're going to talk about. Something always happens. Like something always happens, or you can go preview ahead. Like we talked off the air, like, do we talk about the Olympic brackets this week? And the answer is no, because we don't know who's going to be seated yet because people get pulled out. Like if Sadakov comes out, that it's not just like the same people are in the same spots. Like they add a new person. They don't just add him in his spot. They add him at the bottom and everybody slides up. And anybody who's dealt with brackets, like if you go from the 6 seed to the 5 seed, you went from the bottom to the top of the bracket. The 7 to the 6 doesn't change where you are, but now instead of wrestling the old 6, you're wrestling the old 8. So like everything changes. So it's so it doesn't make sense to really talk about that this week. But I do think we should talk about Iowa State, because I think, one, you and I did it on the phone, and it's very interesting. And number two, that rivalry, dual meet-wise, has not been competitive, but Iowa State beat them last year at the NCAA tournament, and there's certainly no love lost between those programs. I think there's begrudging respect, but they're both programs that have good guys coming back. They also have some interesting holes, so to speak. So let's just walk through it. At Iowa, I think at 25, it'd be Joey Cruz. And from Iowa State, it's either going to be Diversant or probably Terrakina. So I would guess that favors Iowa State. Is that what we would say there?
Well, I think also the Cuban
Diversant. That's a guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to even theorize that, like Ayala would not be at 25 and he would bump up to 133 pounds. Because I think, like, once again, he's been in that kind of weight class for a long time. And I think that, moving up to 133 kind of creates a hole for Iowa at 125, where Iowa State's had a little bit more of a consistent guy who's going to come back for, I think, his fifth or sixth year for our, whatever it is, from COVID and injury and Olympic and non-Olympic, whatever red shirt that you could possibly think of. But I think when you look at that, I think you would give more of an advantage to Terrakina, who I think was in either the round of 12, but like was ranked as high as, maybe even fifth in the country last year. Yeah, I would probably venture that towards the Cyclones in that particular matchup.
Okay. I'm not going to do one. Just do matches.
Yep.
33 would be Frost, who's a returning All-American, against Ayala, who's a returning finalist coming up a weight. I would say that favors Ayala.
I would say so, yes.
Okay, so we're 1-1. So, and we're going to kind of do what we think are the strongest lineups for each school. So 41, we're going to say it's either the other Frost, but I think ideally for Iowa State, it's Echemendia, however you say his name, versus Shriver, Peterson, Ryder Block.
I don't think Ryder's going to be at 41.
Okay, so pretty solid in Iowa State's favor, correct?
Yeah, especially if they have the returning All-American at that weight class again.
And let's plug him in there just for the sake of everybody having their best lineup. So at 49 for Iowa, it'd be Parko. For Iowa State, Swiderski, if we're trying to say best lineup.
So this is where the log jam for Iowa State starts, right?
Right.
So it's the next three weight classes between 49, 57, 65, I think for Iowa State will include part of the conversation of either a Chittum, Pinero, Swiderski,
Echemendia,
like
Mendia.
Somebody in that. And once again, whatever it is, U23 world team member, Pinero Johnson, also previously ranked, as high as like number 1 or number 2 in the nation before the gambling thing. Returning All-American Casey Swiderski. And then everybody knows that Cody Chittum is pretty dang good at wrestling, but was an NCAA qualifier last year, but has a ton of talent. He's in the mix as well. So I personally think I'll just throw Swiderski in there because he's the All-American that was at the weight class the year before, which I'm doing the exact same thing with. Maybe we'll just call him Anthony for right now until I figure out how we need to pronounce his name correctly. But I'll put Swiderski at 49.
And we'll say Parko's a favorite.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're 2-2.
Yep.
Okay, 57, Iowa State is probably Pinero. It's Pinero or Chittum, right?
Yep. So I would say Pinero at this point because I think that he's the guy that was at that kind of weight class freestyle wise.
Yeah, looked really good.
Yeah, looked really good.
Ryder Block, Kobe Seabrick, somebody in that range, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and I think based on, Pinero having wrestled the likes of Gomez and Yanni and those kind of guys, Pinero's a favorite, right?
I would say so.
Okay, so right now the odds of matches have been Iowa State and the even matches have been Iowa. I don't think that changes at 65, right? Caliendo's going to be the preseason number 2. Iowa State's going to probably have – this may be Chittum, right? If Pinero goes 57?
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of that. I think there's a couple of guys that were either redshirting or like backups this year that, like, once again, could not break through the David Carr onslaught, one of the greatest Iowa State wrestlers to ever wrestle for them.
Right.
So I think that there's an aspect of like next guy up that maybe just didn't have an opportunity. But I think Cody Chittum is probably the guy that we would just move up based off of last year's information. Once again, basing a lot of this off of previous whatever it is.
Or yeah, and maybe Amanda Rojas, but whoever it is, unless it's Mitchell Messenbrink, Caliendo is going to be the favorite. So
Correct.
we're 3-3. Okay, now here's where the Iowa State logjam hits. 174, right? So we have, in no particular order, Nelson Brands, Patrick Kennedy, Gabe Arnold against MJ Gaitan, I believe would be probably the most likely candidate there. So let's not even, we'll just say for now, Iowa's the favorite. Is that fair? Without getting bogged down in details, and then we'll talk about who gets pumped up next.
For sure. Yep.
Okay, so it's 4-3 Iowa. Then you go to 84, and it's either Nocturne or Evan Bachman for Iowa State. And it's one of the previously mentioned wrestlers, probably not Kennedy, either Arnold or Brands.
Yeah.
That probably favors Iowa, right? I mean, if it's Nocturne, Gabe, they were always close, but Gabe beat him every time. If it's Nelson Brands, returning All-American, he's the only one of the four that's returning All-American. So I think you have to go Iowa there, right?
I will agree with that.
Okay, 97 is now Christian Carroll and Glazer. So this one's really interesting. This is where, like, the Ferrari loss, and we talked about this last week too. So Ferrari's making visits. He's already visited Northern Colorado. Angelo Ferrari has said for sure he's staying at Iowa. He's also a 174-pounder if they need another one. So, I mean, Glazer was very steady last year, like had only lost to, I think, Brooks in the regular season, but somehow didn't hit like any of the other top 12 guys, which is super weird with Iowa's schedule. It just didn't work out. And then didn't have a great nationals. I think went 1-2. Christian Carroll has worked his way down from heavyweight. He went to 97 kilos at the trials and beat guys like Jacob Warner. Went down to 92 kilos at the U20 or 23s. I think it was 20s, and wrestled really well there. I think it favors Carroll, right?
That's where I would put it, yeah.
Okay, so now it's 5-4. Then at heavyweight, you have Younger Bastida against Ben Keeter. And I think I've said this on the air, Younger Bastida is one of my absolute favorite wrestlers to watch. As good as I think Ben Keeter is, has been, will be, I mean, Younger Bastida is a grown man. I'm guessing he comes back on a mission this year after having beaten literally everybody but Kirkfleet and just not wrestling well at nationals. Like, he would be the guy, if you said pick one guy in the country that didn't place last year that'll place this year, he might be that guy. I mean, I have to look at some other weights, but he was the 2 seed and just whether he had broken fingers or whatever, like, didn't get it done. But his body of work, his consistency, I would pick him. So I would pick him over Keeter.
I would agree as well.
So we're at 5-5. So, then it comes down to upsets and bonuses, right? Upsets are always a thing, right? And then bonus, I mean, and it feels like Iowa State maybe could bonus at 25, right? It feels like if Echemendia is at 41, he could bonus. Feels like Caliendo could bonus. Feels like maybe Iowa could bonus at 74. I mean, depends. Like last year, Kennedy and Gaitan had that crazy match, but Kennedy was just coming off injury and, looked like he was going to literally die from oxygen deprivation. And normally he's in phenomenal shape. So, I mean, that's not that he's not a finely tuned athlete. He was coming back from injury and did what he had to get through it and help the team. So I don't know, but I don't think he bonuses Gaitan. I mean, maybe Nelson Brands over like a redshirt freshman Nocturne by bonus, but maybe not. Christian Carroll, if he can get to his attacks, maybe. But, the one thing where Christian Carroll's probably going to struggle is he doesn't really turn guys, and he's not tall, so he's not great at riding guys for long periods of time. Glazer's really good at holding position. So I don't know if there's bonus there. Bastida bonused over almost everybody last year, but Ben Keeter is a huge recruit, right? The only reason he wasn't ranked higher as a recruit, he was ranked super high, was the variation of will he wrestle? But like if you just said he wasn't going to play football, he was a more highly rated recruit than Gabe, and he's also at the bookends, which is harder to find guys that are going to be hitters there right away. I mean, the middle of the bell curve, there's a ton of dudes. So that's a fascinating duel, and that duel is so important in that state. Where was it last year? Was it at Iowa or Iowa State?
I was at Iowa State. It'll be in Carver now.
That's right. I was there. Geez, I was there. Yeah, because that's one where they did it on ESPN, so it'll be at Carver. Maybe I'll make the trek up. That could be fun.
It's always a good time, my friend. Always a good time.
You could probably find me a place in Iowa City that has as good as wings as where we went to at Iowa State, right? Or names.
Oh, yeah. We can definitely do that.
So I think the last thing maybe to touch on, if we go a few minutes early this week, it's okay. I think people need to be aware of what's going on with these massive sweeping NCAA rules. Like there's now unlimited transfers, and now schools can pay athletes. I think the first thing just to reiterate here is these rules are based on A, the NCAA has never won a lawsuit in their life, and B, I mean, they're holding on by a thread to even have an organization, and it's really tied to the NCAA basketball tournament because they don't get any revenue from the football bowl games. So they're just they're like the parent where the kids are making more money than them. And so like the kids are like, why are we listening to you? Because, they're not disciplining. I mean, like they're not governing anything, like I heard from a super reliable source that a kid that signed with the university class at 24, another school just called that kid and offered him a huge bag. And the kid is signed. Now, I mean, again, that's how these kids transfer. Somebody, behind the scenes makes a call and says, well, hey, Grant, hey, if you're not happy with doing the podcast at USA Wrestling, we'd love to have you over here at XYZ podcasting company. And, we'd offer you X instead of Y. So I talked to a Division I coach that I really, really respect, both as a person and his knowledge. And he says, I'm concerned that in 10 years or so, we're only going to see 40 teams that have wrestling. And, everyone's going to be on scholarship, which is good. Here's the crazy sidecar of that. And then I'm interested in what you think. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. I think in 5 years, it's going to be cheaper to go to Division I than it's going to be to go to NAI or JUCO or D2. Because like football now, if you go to Division I and you get a Scully, it's a full because there's 85 fulls. Like there's 85 roster spots and 85 fulls, so everybody gets a full. And now you're just arguing about who was getting money under the table. Now it's who's getting money over the table. So let's say that, for example, the roster count is 32, 3 per weight, 4 125s, 4 heavyweights. That always seemed like a reasonable number. Okay. So 32 kids are getting fulls. You don't have to worry about Pell Grant anymore, institutional aid, minority aid, academic aid, any of that stuff, just full. Okay. So where before, like a kid was going to walk on for a scout, walk on, get books, whatever, get that 20% number. A Grandview, a Merrimack could say, look, come here. You can get more money. It'll cost you less net to go to school. Hey, if you win it, even NAI, we trust Nick Mitchell. He'll send you on if you want to leave. Okay, in JUCO, certainly you can leave. That's the goal. Now, if that kid was good enough for the 32nd spot on the roster, he might never see the light of day, but he's still going to get more money than a national champion at an NAI school. Because, you guys can't have 10 guys on fulls. That's not how that system operates. Financial aid matters at those schools. Academic aid matters at those schools. Institutional aid, all these things matter. So I'm just curious on if you guys as a staff have even considered this yet, talked about it, and if not staff perspective, just your perspective on that.
I think we're getting into an unprecedented time in collegiate athletics. And I don't think that there's anybody that has a crystal ball to really understand what the gravity of this whole new realm of paying athletes, NIL, full ride scholarship, the whole thing, employee payment, who's paying for what, who gets what for academics, what everything that needs to be able to occur for these athletes to be a part of the athletic department. It is such a wild time where we've gone through so much in the past 3 years with athletics, like almost the complete, I don't know the proper word, delusion or basically dissolving the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Historic conference, right? Just basically doesn't exist anymore. Just flat out doesn't. It's like the Big 8 that went to the Big 12. Like the Big 8 is gone, never going to come back ever again.
Right.
So Stanford is part of the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so I think for anybody to stand on top of a podium and just say like, hey, I know how this is all going to go, I would highly criticize that person for thinking that they know exactly how this is all going to pan out.
They're genius or delusional. Yeah.
Right. It's either like they're just like Nostradamus and they just like know what's going to happen. And it's like, or you have just everyone's kind of waiting and seeing. I think to bring this to, you know, I would say probably closer to home, like Illinois was planning on building a wrestling room and they've had that plan for like, I think 10 years now. And the athletic director just basically came out and said like, hey, we don't know if this is the best use of $5 million or $10 million for the university currently right now, because we don't know how this is all going to play out.
Similar scenario at Iowa State, right?
I believe so. And I think that there's other institutions around the entire country that are facing these exact same questions on like, what are we going to do? Or how is this going to affect us? Or, you know, what is the conference realignment going to do for our university scope? I know that there's a lot of, you know, now the Big 12 is ginormous and they're bringing in other teams. You know, the Pac-12 for wrestling is down to 4 schools.
And a couple of those schools aren't even real Pac-12 schools; they're affiliate schools. Yeah,
they're affiliate schools, right? So you know, there's a whole aspect of that with this conference realignment for basically basketball and or football, that's the king player in this entire scenario, right? Not to mention like the conference realignment money for travel. You know, once again, now North Carolina is going to have to either figure out a West Coast road trip to go visit. You know, I think is it Cal? Did Cal go to I think Cal went to the athletic or the ACC.
Yeah, Stanford.
Yeah,
just like UCLA and USC are in the Big Ten now, right? So like, and then it doesn't matter in wrestling, but like if you're playing lacrosse or I don't know, like baseball, okay? Like now, like if you're Minnesota, I mean, they got to work it out, right? Like if you're Minnesota, you go visit both of them. Or then like if you're Purdue, those 2 schools are coming and wrestling Purdue and Indiana. Like, you know, they're coming, like you're not they got to just work that out, right? But the crazy thing is people go, well, that's a lot of money. Like, well, this is all based on like the Big Ten network and things like this. And that's where that Pac-12 commissioner got behind the times. And there was so much money. And this is a socialism, capitalism conversation where like UCLA and USC were like, we're generating a bunch of money for a conference that other members are not generating nearly the same amount. It trickles down to wrestling. I talked to Roden at Oregon State. He told me that the NCAA said they can wrestle with 4 teams in the conference for a year, and that they're going to give them a waiver and that the champion's an automatic qualifier, because if they don't give them a waiver, they're not an automatic qualifier. Like you have to have 5 teams. And you can argue whether it's fair or unfair. Certainly, like Oregon State's not ducking competition. These people got up and left. You know, like Arizona State left, Stanford left, and they're not ducking Oregon State either. Like I mean, It wasn't like Zeke Jones called and said, we want to get out of this. Like Zeke Jones was told, you're in the Big 12 now. You know, Chris Ayers was told, you're in the ACC now. You know, so this is such a fascinating time to have a podcast. I will say that, just to get to talk about these things, because it's like you said, it could go in a million directions. I mean, if you had told me 5 years ago Stanford was going to be in the ACC, I'm like whatever you're drinking, I want one of those.
Yeah, there's tons of, I would say, even like repercussions and or advantages to what is occurring. And we just don't know what those are yet, because we haven't, like, once again, I don't think there's anybody that has a crystal ball that says like, hey, now, once again, an athlete of whatever caliber in football, basketball, wrestling, doesn't matter, is going to get $1 million a year. That's absurd to me. Like,
it's so funny you say that, because the kid that got offered a bunch of money, and again, I know their coaches, I feel super reliable, I wasn't lied to. The amount of the bag was crazy. And then I was like, the guy goes, was it really crazy? Like, he's going to probably score this many points. And that's okay. So that's what it comes down to, right? Like, if you score 2 points at the national tournament, let's do a very just easy mathematical equation. Say every point at the national tournament is worth $10,000. Okay. So if you're you're a 20-point guy, you're worth 200,000. I'm a 2-point guy, I'm worth 20,000. It doesn't really work that way, because there's a bunch of guys that can score 2 points, right? There's a bunch of guys that can get one pin on the backside and score 2.5 points, right? Or a tech on the backside, and that's 2 points. There's so few guys that can score 20 points. And then here's the other dynamic of that, right? Like, if I offer you this much money and you haven't done it yet, what about all the guys that are on the team that have already placed? Like, we talked about this years ago when Real Woods came over to Iowa. Jacob Warner had made the finals the year before.
right.
So, like, whatever Real got, Jacob's got to be like, well, look, that dude hasn't made the finals yet, and I have. Like, am I now going to be financially penalized for having started here? So it's almost like you're creating an arms war, an arms race financially within your own system, right? And there's also, I mean, there's obviously possibilities that the numbers that are out there are lies, and that's a strong possibility. But the kids on the team that are with each other every day, they kind of know. I mean, you coach a bunch of college guys. I mean, I don't think there's any way that some of these guys don't know how much aid the other guys are getting. I mean, they might not sit down and compare their letters, but I mean, especially if somebody really outperforms their contract, right? Like, if you guys got a kid who's a walk-on and he goes in, like, you think this guy's a depth guy. And I know you've never said that out loud to anybody in your life, but there's guys that we've all recruited. They're like, I really doubt this guy's going to start. And then people get hurt. He gets better. He goes and wins the Nationals. And let's just say his 20 points are the difference between you winning it or not. It hadn't even been that close in a bunch of years, but let's say it is. He's literally arguably the difference. And he was on $1,000 in books. You probably got to bump him. I mean, because if you don't bump him, everybody in the country is calling him. And so then that now affects everybody else, because you guys have to hit a certain average, and he fit in the old average. Now he doesn't fit into the new average. So it's almost like you have to have, it's almost like a salary cap in fantasy football, right? You almost have to have salary cap manager.
It's when I think that there's an aspect of, even right now, there's a lot of kids that, like, they're growing up in a system where, like, it's going to be completely and utterly with the wild, wild west, right?
Yes.
I also think that there's an aspect of, like, education that plays into some of this stuff, like being able to, like, transfer out for your grad school stuff. There's still an educational piece to the school. I mean, as long as, like, we're discussing intercollegiate athletics, they still go to class, so they have to be eligible.
Yeah.
Like, but I think that there's a whole bunch of other things that, like, need to occur And once again, I think that's why we're discussing, like, there's so many wild topics to discuss when it's this system, because you just don't know, right?
Yeah.
Just don't know.
Crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So, I mean, so many things to kick around. Next week we hit July. We'll probably record on Wednesday because Thursday, July 4th, maybe even Tuesday, so we can give it to Gary and he can have time to put it up before the holiday. So hopefully Mark will be back by then. And July, the opening ceremonies are July 26th, right? I believe.
Yep.
So we'll only have you for a couple more weeks, and then you're off to Paris, just racking up Instagram followers with your food posts and hotel miles and travel miles and forgetting about us little guys back in America.
Yeah, not the case.
Well, hopefully you and I will have a big announcement in a couple weeks about something coming up in Philadelphia that we've been working on together. So, and that shirt is a reminder of that to me. We are working on something significant. Talk to Gary Abbott about it. So hopefully we'll be able to do the reveal before you leave for Paris. So for Mark and Grant, I'm David. Thank you guys for watching and listening. We will see you all next week.